Welcome to the very first episode of So Much and More to Say. My name is Nefemi, and I'm happy you guys are here to listen. So, today, the first production that I'm going to be talking about on So Much and More to Say is called Extraordinary You, and it is a South Korean TV show. And it's actually the show that kind of inspired the podcast. So, I had first watched it last fall in 2022, and I had so many thoughts. There were so many things I was thinking about, so many things I wanted to say, and I just felt like I could talk somebody's ear off about it. And then I decided to rewatch it again this summer when I was thinking about, starting a podcast to refresh my memory. And I was like, yeah, I have to talk about this show. It's just, honestly, it's a great show. I like it a lot. So, Extraordinary You is based on a webtoon called July Found by Chance, written by, and I have to apologize ahead of time for how I may mispronounce names, but it was written by Mu Ryuri, and the show was developed by Kim Dae-jin, written by In Ji-hye and Song Ha-young, and it was directed by Kim Sang-hyuk. Yes, so that's a little backstory about Extraordinary You. And so the show follows Indano, who is a high school student who one day discovers that she's actually a character in a comic book. And so she doesn't like the setup she has because her character has a heart disease. I think she has a heart that's too small, and so basically she's set up to die, and she's also engaged to this other character called Baekhyung, who is just so mean to her, and so she hates her setup and everything. And when she becomes aware that she's a character in a comic book, she decides that she's going to actually make her own storyline, and she gets the help of this nameless, mysterious extra. But as she and the extra change things in the story, it has consequences, and then they come to learn some other things about, the past. And so Extraordinary You was honestly, it was a fun TV show, I would say. It was definitely entertaining. And one of my favorite things about the whole show in general was just the concept of it and the actual world. You've got, as somebody who likes to read and to write, this TV show, this concept of characters becoming self-aware and there being a writer and everything, I love it so much. And I think the first 4 episodes of this show are the strongest. It was a really good opening because first things first, we're thrust into the world. Dano thinks she's going crazy. She keeps hearing the sound of a page turning, but I don't think she knows. She doesn't know it's the sound of a page turning at first, but she keeps hearing the sound of a page turning. She doesn't track of time. She doesn't remember what's happening. She doesn't know how she's getting to different locations. She doesn't know what's happening. Days are passing by, and she's waking up in school and then waking up at home in the hospital. It's what's going on? And so then she comes to understand that, oh my gosh, she's a character in a comic book. And so she initially thinks that she's the main character. And so she's like, oh, all the boys are crazy about me, blah, blah, blah. Only for her to find out she's actually an extra and she's not the main character. And I love the way that they revealed that because it showed you all the scenes that had taken place from her perspective. It showed you the actual perspective where she wasn't the main character, but a different girl was. And I just thought that was really fun. I think the first 4 episodes are amazing. And yeah, some of my favorites. I loved the idea of there being a stage and a shadow. So basically how the world is set up is that there's the stage is where everything the writer wants to happen happens. That's where characters say the lines as the writer has written them to. That's how the characters they don't have any control over what they do, what they say. It's all as the writer wants. But sometimes the characters who are self-aware, so the characters that realize they're actually characters in a comic book, sometimes when you're watching the show, they make little comments and stuff in their head about how cheesy their lines are or how stupid the scene is, which is so funny. I absolutely love that part. So then you have the stage where everything as the writer wants it to happen happens. But then you also have the shadow. I mean, the shadow is the state in between the next scenes that are going to happen. So the shadows where the characters are pretty much not on stage, they're not doing anything. The story's kind of just at a standstill until the writer starts to write again. And it's only the characters who are self-aware that remember what happens in the shadow. So in the shadow, because it's technically not part of the book, it's kind of just the book in waiting, I guess. There's some crazy things that happen sometimes, like chairs will be floating or clocks will be floating, and then all the characters who aren't aware of themselves in the story, they only act in character with the personalities of what they understand. It's only the characters who are self-aware that can act out of character. And so in the shadow, those characters just act based on what they know, and that's it. And so I loved the idea of, there being the shadow and the stage. I also loved how you would see the transition from the stage to the shadow. There would always be the sound of like a page flipping, and then the characters would they would stop and they'd be like, and then the scene would start. And there's also they're changing there's a change in the color scheme of the show and stuff like that. I thought that was really great. I love that. That was really, 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 really fun. And yeah, I also really, really liked the characters. I think, okay, so there are 3 main characters, and it's Indano, she's a main character, and then it's Baekhyun and Haru. So the way it's set up is this. In the actual comic book called Secret, in which the story takes place, Indano is just an extra. But in the TV show Extraordinary You, she's the main character. So Indano is engaged to Baekhyun, who is a member of A3, which is Baekhyun, Idoa, and Onamju. Onamju is the main character of Secret. And so Baekhyun is in that trio of the cool guys, and he's also Indano's fiance. And so Haru is this random extra that just pops up out of nowhere. And at the beginning of the story, he doesn't even have a face in the comic. The writer didn't even draw him all the way. But then as the story progresses, he kind of becomes more prevalent in Secret. And so when Haru and Dano meet each other, there's this kind of pull, there's this draw, they just seem to always find themselves in each other's paths, always together, Her heart's always skipping a beat whenever she sees him for some reason. And so I think Dano is one of the most fun main characters I've ever seen in a K-drama. She's just really exciting. I really like her. She was funny. The actress did a great job portraying her. Haru and Dano have the main romance of the whole show, but I was not that much of a fan of Haru. I remember the first time I watched this show, I disliked his character so much because he was so boring to me. And the second time I watched it, I realized, okay, yes, it's in line with his character, because in the show, at least in Secret, Haru doesn't have a personality. He's just an extra. He just shows up. He's just there for the story to move along or to fill space in the background. So it makes sense that he has no character. But it was so for me. I was like, I don't care about him. All he's about is Indano. He has no personality. I don't know anything about him outside of school. Nothing. He's so boring. And that's why I found Baekhyun to be a more interesting character and a more engaging character. Now, Baekhyun at first, because he was the antagonist as well as the second lead, he was mean. There's some characters who are mean, but he was mean. He was rude, he was disrespectful, he didn't care about anybody's feelings. The way he treated Dano was honestly so bad. It was horrible. It was bad. The writer was, I don't know why the writer would do that. It was, yeah. But as the story progresses and as Baekhyun becomes more self-aware, he starts to change very gradually. He starts to change, become better, more selfless. And so, but honestly, I enjoyed watching Baekhyun more, not because I necessarily liked him as a character at first, but because he was just a lot more interesting. There was a lot more about him that I could see and know. I could see his life at home. I could see, you know, him having contradictory feelings and emotions. And I just found that he was a lot more engaging and interesting to watch because, you know, he was well-rounded, whereas Haru was just there for Ndano. And as the story progressed, so from a previous book called Trumpet Creeper, which was set in the Joseon era. And so we realized that in that book, Baekhyun, Haru, and Ndano were the main characters. And it seems that the storyline of that book is actually unfolding in secret. And it's like, what's going on? I like how they kind of put clues and Easter eggs in it of like the previous book. Because there's one part I remember where Haru was playing a recorder. I don't think it was a recorder, but it looked like a recorder. Was it a recorder? I don't remember. But he was playing it and he played it so well. And the teacher was like, oh, are you from the Joseon era? I could see why the teacher said that. Once we start to see more of Trumpet Creeper, the story that happened before, Haru was still boring to me, but he was an interesting kind of boring where I was like, okay, you're not entirely just there. And it was interesting. I would say, even though I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of Ndano and Haru as a couple, just because once again I didn't care much for Haru, and for me when it comes to romances, I don't want to just root for a romance. I want to root for two individual characters in a romance, you know? And so I didn't really care much about their romance, but I will say I definitely did like this idea of, you know, Haru just only knowing Dano, remembering her, and then like, you know, as the story progresses and he gets more of his memories back, you know, their love like, you know, grows stronger, something like, I don't know, whatever. That was okay. I kind of did like it. But yeah, I preferred Baekhyun's character to Haru's character. So yeah, my favorite characters out of the show were Baekhyun and Ndano. I also loved the cast of characters of the classroom. I think they were very funny and hilarious. Idoa was also a great addition. I loved his friendship with Ndano because at first he was one of the few characters that were actually self-aware of himself. He was one of the few characters actually self-aware of himself. He was one of the few characters actually aware of himself at the beginning. Wait, what am I trying to say? Okay, he was one of the few characters that was actually self-aware along with Ndano. And so seeing their friendship and seeing them figure things out together was really, 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 really fun. I really also liked the off-brand A3. So I don't remember their names, but there was another trio of guys who were kind of like Onamju's minions, and they would basically just like do whatever Namju wanted them to do, but sometimes they tried to act as if they were A3, which was really funny. They were funny. I didn't like the girls that were like the antagonists and the bullies because it was just really repetitive seeing them do the same thing every episode. All in all, I thought it was a fun show, a fun dynamic. I really, really, really loved how they didn't necessarily break the fourth wall, but I loved how you would see the characters on the stage having a scene and then they'll be thinking in their heads like, oh, this line is so stupid. I love that. That's one of my favorite parts. And also the idea of the stage versus the shadow. I love that. The show it's 32 episodes long, but every episode is like 30 minutes long. And so typically with a South Korean TV show, it runs for, you know, one season, typically like 16 episodes, and each episode is about an hour to an hour and a half in length, I believe. So this show, if the episodes hadn't been cut in half, would have been basically a 16 episode a 16 episode hour length each show. But because they divided in half those 32 episodes, I think at some point certain things did kind of start to get repetitive. Sometimes the characters would kind of say the same things in different episodes, and I don't know if it was because I binge watched it that it stuck out more to me. That kind of was something that took me out of the show a little bit, was just that it felt a bit repetitive, and also felt like I wouldn't necessarily like there were too many episodes, but I feel like the story could have definitely been wrapped up a bit earlier. But all in all, it was still entertaining. It was still fun. And one thing I also was thinking about was like, I fully empathize with Ndano. You know, the writer gave her a horrible kind of setup in a way. You know, she just had to like be treated like trash by the guy she had loved forever. But I mean, you know, he did no. So she she did kind of end up getting treated like trash by the guy she liked, and she was like set to die, and she was just there to like fuel the main character's storylines. So I can see her frustration. But then I remember thinking like, Dano, what about everybody else? I was like, you're so upset about your storyline and you want to change everything because of you, but it's like, how is that going to impact the other characters, you know? And so that was something that came to mind. And at the end of the day, I feel like it just basically it's like Dano lived in a world she didn't create. Therefore, she was limited. She was not going to be able to, how do I say this? I feel like the best persons who have changed the storylines without things getting absolutely messed up all the time for everybody would have probably been the writer. But we don't know anything about the writer. I don't think the writer needed to be a character in the show, but it would have been interesting to know a bit more about the writer in a way, because you got this person who just like controls everything, for some reason is using the same characters over and over again in different stories, and we don't know why. We don't know anything about what the person is thinking, what, you know, he or she is planning. Although sometimes one thing that happened was that Ndano was able to see the storyboard for some reason. Nobody else could, but she could see basically what the writer was going to do next, but she only saw it to an extent, and that was interesting. But I wonder why only Dano could. I have a theory. Because in Trumpet Creeper, Dano died. So was it because she died in like the previous book and was in the, wait, no, because the other, no, I'm not gonna think about that too much. But yes, I was thinking that, you know, I fully empathize with Dano, but it's like how like you changing your storyline is gonna also impact everybody else's storyline too, and it may not impact it in a good way. And so the best person to have changed the storylines would have been the writer, but we don't know anything about the writer. I couldn't help but think about God when I was watching the show and like seeing the writer and stuff like that, and how with like, because you know I'm a Christian, and so I was just trying to see, I just was thinking about like how, you know, you've got this, the writer is like this all-knowing creator of this book, and then in the world you've got like God, who's the all-knowing, all-powerful God that created everything. But unlike the writer, it's like we're actually able to know God. We can actually discern like his character, who he is. We can actually talk to God too, whereas the writer's just like kind of locked up away from everything, and nobody knows who the writer is. They don't know if they can trust the writer. They don't know what the writer's thinking. Whereas with God, it's like, you know, you read the Bible and it shows you who he is. You know, you look at Jesus, who is the Son of God, who is God himself, who is, you know, God. Like, you want to know how God is, look at Jesus, right? And I remember sometimes I would watch the show and I would just be thinking, oh, I'm so glad Jesus isn't like that. You know, how in the sense that even though to like there are things that are out of my control, because once again, I live in a world I didn't create, so I have no control over certain things that are going to happen to me or to other people, but I do have control over, you know, my choice. Like, I have the free will to choose certain things, don't choose certain things, right? And also I'm able to be like guided in the right direction by the Holy Spirit. And so I thought it was just interesting for me to watch the show and think of that. At the end of the day, in the show, I feel like Dano and like all the other characters, they didn't know the writer, so they couldn't trust the writer. Whereas in real life, you know, it's like, for me, I can speak for myself, you know, and for some other Christians too, that, you know, we know God, And so we trust God. And even when things happen that we don't understand why it's happening or how, it could be used for good in any way, we can still trust that the story's going in the right direction because we trust the person who's writing it. And so then you see, Extraordinary You. And honestly, I would have loved to know just a little bit more about the writer, but I don't think we ever will. It would have been cool to. I don't know if something like that was put in the webtoon. I didn't read the webtoon. I have no idea what happens in the webtoon. I don't know how close I don't know how close the story of the show sticks to the story of the webtoon, but basically after all is done and done, Haru has to vanish. I guess the story of that world is closing, and so things kind of start disappearing because the writer's getting ready to wrap up the world. And so I guess the writer starts erasing things and people, so people just start disappearing, and characters in the shadow are like, what happened to so and so? So like people are noticing, and at some point Dano and Haru have to be separated again because at the end of the show, I do like a good happy ending, but I also kind of like bittersweet endings. I also like shows where in terms of the romances, sometimes it's a bit bittersweet or it's a bit tragic. And so you see how in the first book Indano and Haru were together she ends up dying and he's left alone, to mourn her after she dies. In secret, Haru vanishes before the story's finished, and Indano has to go on and live for like another year and graduate school without him. And then, but when the show ended, the writer once again is using the same characters, but now they're in university. And Dano and Haru are there. And at first, I guess they don't remember each other at first or something. It's like kind of hinted at that like Dano's following the little like clues that lead to Haru, and she meets him and she says his name, but he doesn't recognize her at first. Then he says her name, and then they hug, and it's like, oh, happily ever after, the end. I don't know if it's happily ever after. I doubt it probably was, but yeah, you've got that. And I would say I did definitely like this whole idea of their love was kind of like tragic, and they'd always like lose each other in whatever book they were in, I think. So that was interesting. I will also say Baekhyun, I feel like people just glossed over what he was actually going through at home, because in the show the characters could read the book as it was being written, right? And Baekhyun was not being treated well at all by his dad. Now Baekhyun, once again, Baekhyun was horrible. He was a really, really bad guy at first, he was really mean. And this is not to excuse anything, but that being said, you could also see kind of what he was dealing with at home, but nobody kind of like talked about it. It was kind of like glossed over. I was like, are we just ignoring the fact that Kyung's dad is literally like selling his son off as like property in order to go up in like the business world? Because basically Kyung and Dano were engaged, and Kyung's dad was really pushing it because he wanted to be in the business with Indano's dad for some reason. I don't know exactly what was going on, but it was about money. That's all I know. It was about money. He wanted money, I guess, and whatever that came with it. And so he was really pushing his son to get engaged to Dano. And it was nasty. It was sick. It was really nasty. But then it seemed like nobody really cared. Like, I guess, like, none of the characters really, like, talked about what Baekhyun was going through, I think. And that was, like, I was like, okay. Are we just gonna ignore this? So, I also want to talk about the main characters of the book Secret, Onamju and Yojuda. And side note, when I learned that the names of certain characters meant what their roles were in the story, I thought that was really, really funny, and I thought that was really cool too. I really, really like that. I love the connection between name and a character's identity. Love that. But Onamju and Yojuda, the typical stereotypical cliche romance, she's poor and she's, quiet and I guess kind of a pushover. He's rich and, he's like the most attractive guy at school and every girl wants to be with him. And now all the girls hate her because he wants to be with her. They were insufferable. That's a word. They were insufferable at first, but in a funny way. It was like I was still entertained when I watched them because of the side comments of the self-aware characters. But at some point, Yojuda becomes self-aware, and I loved it when she became self-aware because she started to fight back against the girls that were bullying her, and I was like, yeah, Juda. And then when Yojuda became self-aware, she still had feelings for Namjoon. She still liked him, but she was a bit more, assertive, if that makes sense, in the shadow, even when he didn't like understand or remember anything that was going on or what she was even saying. I think the love triangle between her, Namjoon, and Idoa, both on the stage and in the shadow, I'm not a huge fan of love triangles, so I was kind of like, oh, whatever. I'm honestly not a huge fan of second leads. I just feel like, let the two main characters fall in love. Why does there need to be some other character that has to stand in the way? No, I don't like that. But seeing the love triangle happen on stage and then also in the shadow and how they kind of paralleled and mimicked each other and how in both cases Idoa didn't get Yojuda, that was cool. I think I kind of like that a little bit. And also in the story, there was this other character called, what was his name? We don't know his name. He was actually just referred to as the dry squid fairy, I think. He was like a cook at the school, and he was like the mysterious kind of mentorish figure that knew what was going on and knew so much more, and he would like kind of help and guide the other characters who were figuring it out too. He was very much mysterious, very I don't know. I didn't know enough about him really, but he was also in the previous book, and in the previous book in Trumpet Creeper, he had been self-aware and he had tried to basically do what Indano and Haru were doing in secret, but it had ended horribly for him. What else? I feel like there's more that I want to say, but I don't remember. And I really hope I haven't just rambled for like the past 30 minutes. Sometimes, I don't know, sometimes like my brain can go in like 5 different directions at once. And then it's like, wait, does it sound coherent? I know sometimes when I'm giving like a presentation, it's happened before where sometimes it's like I know I'm saying words and I know they're stringing together well, but I don't know if other people are like understanding it well. I think I'm just overthinking sometimes when I do that, but yeah. But yes, honestly, I gave Extraordinary You a 7 out of 10 because for one, I thought it was really fun, really enjoyable, love the characters, love the concept, love the world, but I didn't feel like it needed as many episodes as it did. And also I wasn't a huge fan of Haru. I just felt like, he wasn't really interesting and he was like the main guy, so there was that. But I will say he was kind of like, it was, no, I don't have anything else to say. Sorry. But yes, I believe that's it. I can't really think of anything else that I want to say, but yeah, thank you for watching the very first episode of So Much More to Say. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you next time with the next episode. Thanks so much for listening. Bye!